Okay, so this is the first part of the series for latest. So basically, we're going to be using Blender 3.2, version 3.2, and this is sort of going to be how to use Blender to set up some nice 2D drawing or painting references. And just for the sort of intro, basically by the end of this course, you should be able to model basically whatever you want and how to, position them in the scene, how to set up the scale properly, and just sort of understanding the very basic fundamentals of how the software works. And for this first lesson, um, basically what I want to talk about is how everything in Blender is a container. And this is something that I wish that I knew going into 3D. Everything that you see is a container. If we go over to our outliner panel, this is sort of like where everything is in the scene. So it kind of looks like the layer panel in Photoshop. Um, but this isn't really how you should be thinking this. Basically, everything in here is a container. So we start off with our scene, which is basically what we see in our viewport here. And within that scene, we have a collection. And a collection is just a collection of objects. And these are our objects here. And what an object is just a container full of information. So this camera here is just is an object, but the object is really just a container of information. If we go down to our properties panel and click the camera icon while selecting the camera, you can see we have a whole bunch of data here. We have the type perspective. We can change to orthographic or panoramic. We can change the focal length. We can have depth of field. So if you want to focus on a certain object and have blur everywhere else, we can do that. But basically, the object and the data within that object are not the same thing. That's what I'm trying to say. And this light is an object, but it has its own properties. If we go and click on the data here, we have the power in watts, we have the diffuse, specular, and volume, radius, shadows. So these are all the data within this object. And this is going to be a very important distinction when you are modeling your mesh and you want to edit the object properties versus like the actual data that's in the object. So if we look at our cube, we select the cube with a left click and you hit period on the number pad. This will sort of change the view. And if I use my middle mouse and drag, I can sort of pivot around our object. And up in the top left here, you can see we are currently in object mode. If we hit tab, this will change to edit mode. And now we are viewing the actual data in this object. So before we're looking at the total object, now we are looking at the data. And you can see there are these little points here. These are called vertexes. So this is the actual data that makes up this object. And I can change this data and move it around. And I can move this data. Okay. Now, if I duplicate this, and you don't have to follow along, you can just look. And now I can combine this to make one object. I can see what I'm talking about. So now these two cubes are one object. And I can edit the data, but it's still one object. And like I said, an object is a container. And it just holds the data. So that's a really important distinction. We can call this couple of cubes. So that's going to be our first lesson. It's something that's pretty quick. Really, all you need to know is that everything is a container. An object is a container, and it holds this data in here. And that's really all you need to know for the first lesson. Hopefully you understand that. And in the next video, I'm going to be talking about how to actually navigate through the UI and things like that. So really, in this video, you don't really have to follow along. It's just something you can just watch. And in the next one, I will want you to be following along. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.